The text message on my phone came in at exactly 5:47 in the morning. I was already awake, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the early morning traffic rolling down the street outside my window. I am an early riser. In my line of work, the quiet hours before the sun comes up are usually the only time I get to think clearly. I reached over to my nightstand, picked up the phone, and looked at the screen. The message was from my bank. It was just one single sentence. Your account access has been temporarily suspended pending verification of recent authorization changes. I did not panic right away. People assume that when you get a message like that, your heart instantly drops into your stomach. But that is not how my brain operates. I am a forensic accountant. I spend 50 to 60 hours a week investigating corporate financial fraud, tracing hidden assets, and auditing shell companies for federal regulators. I look at anomalies for a living. So when I read that text, my first thought was simply that the bank's automated fraud detection system had flagged a recurring subscription or a minor software glitch. I sat up on the edge of my bed, rubbed my eyes, and tapped the icon to open my mobile banking app. The screen loaded for a second. Then, a solid red banner appeared across the top of my phone. It read, "Access denied." Below it, in smaller white letters, was a secondary message instructing me to contact my local branch immediately for assistance. I tapped the screen again. Nothing happened. The app was completely locked down. It was not just a hold on a checking account. It was a total freeze on my entire portfolio. That portfolio included my everyday accounts, my emergency savings, and most importantly, the trust fund. The trust fund was worth $2.5 million. It had been sitting under my name and my name only for 16 years. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and stood by the counter while the machine hummed. I poured myself a mug of black coffee. The heat of the ceramic warmed my hands, and I took a slow sip. I leaned against the marble counter and started running through the possibilities in my head. Identity theft was the most logical answer. Someone halfway across the world had gotten hold of my social security number and tried to wire the funds to an offshore account. But then I remembered the phrasing of the text message. It did not say suspicious activity. It said recent authorization changes. You do not change authorizations by hacking a password. You change authorizations by submitting legal documents to a bank. Documents like a power of attorney. I set the coffee mug down. The silence in my kitchen suddenly felt very heavy. There was only one group of people on this planet who knew exactly which bank held that specific trust fund, knew my account numbers, and had enough of my personal information to even attempt submitting legal documents on my behalf. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother's number. I knew it was early, but I did not care. She picked up on the second ring. That was the first red flag. My mother, Patricia, never wakes up before 7 in the morning. She is a woman who values her beauty sleep above almost everything else. The fact that she answered immediately meant she was already awake. It meant she was waiting by the phone. "David," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. She did not say good morning. She did not ask why I was calling her before 6 in the morning. She just said my name in that flat, even tone she always used right before she told me I was overreacting to something. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "My banking app just locked me out. It says there are authorization changes on the trust fund. Do you know anything about this?" There was a pause on the line. It was not the pause of a woman who was confused or shocked. It was the calculated pause of a woman deciding which script she was going to read from. Well, she started, letting out a soft breath. "Your father and I had a long conversation last week. We have been very worried about you, David. The stress at your firm has been so high lately, and we know you have not been sleeping well. We thought it was time for us to step in and help you manage things. Familia first, right? We have to protect each other." I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest. It was not shock. It was a deep, quiet realization that everything my grandfather had warned me about was actually happening. My mother was using the word familia. In our Mexican-American household, that word was never just a noun. It was a weapon. It was a tool of compliance. Familia meant you surrendered your boundaries. Familia meant you never questioned your elders. Familia meant what was yours was actually theirs. What did you do? I asked. It was not a question. It was a demand for data. I heard a rustling sound, and then my father, Robert, was on the line. I knew my mother had put me on speakerphone. My father used his calm, deep, reasonable voice. The voice he used to negotiate car prices and dismiss my opinions when I was a teenager. David, listen to me, my father said slowly. We did what any responsible parents would do for their son. We had a power of attorney drawn up. There is a medical letter on file. You have been struggling, son. You are burning out at work. We are well within our rights as your next of kin to act on your behalf when you are not in a position to make sound financial decisions. We are doing this for your own good. We are just holding it for you until you get your head straight. I stood in my kitchen and stared at the digital clock on the microwave. I am 36 years old. I manage multi-million-dollar forensic audits for international corporations. I own my own home. I pay my own bills. I had not seen my parents in 4 months, and our last phone call had lasted less than 5 minutes. They did not know my work schedule. They did not know my stress levels. They knew nothing about my mental state. What doctor? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. What doctor signed a letter saying I cannot manage my own money? My mother chimed back in immediately. Sweetheart, you do not need to worry about the legal details right now. Just relax. Let us handle the heavy lifting. You have been so emotional lately. You are just not thinking clearly. I did not yell. I did not curse. I did not tell them they were criminals. A forensic accountant does not argue with a fraudster over the phone. A forensic accountant gathers the evidence and goes to the authorities. I simply pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. I walked into my bedroom and went straight to my closet. I bypassed my casual clothes and reached for my charcoal gray suit. It is a very specific suit. It is tailored, sharp, and entirely devoid of warmth. It is the suit I wear when I have to sit in a deposition room and tell a company executive that I have found the millions of dollars they tried to hide in offshore accounts, and that they are going to federal prison. It is my armor. I put on a crisp white shirt, a subtle blue tie, and my polished black Oxford shoes. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a highly competent, deeply dangerous financial professional. I grabbed my leather briefcase, slid my passport and 2 forms of state identification inside, and grabbed my car keys. I walked out to my car and started the engine. The drive to the bank took 20 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in complete silence, watching the city wake up around me. The sky was turning a pale, bruised purple. As I drove, I started building a mental timeline of events. I compartmentalized my emotions. I took the anger, the betrayal, and the deep, aching sadness of realizing my parents had finally crossed the point of no return, and I shoved it all into a tight box in the back of my mind. I needed pure logic. They had filed a power of attorney. That meant they needed my signature. I had never signed anything for them. Therefore, the signature was a forgery. They claimed they had a medical letter stating I was mentally incompetent. I have never seen a psychiatrist in my life. Therefore, the medical document was falsified. Submitting forged legal and medical documents to a federally insured financial institution is not a misunderstanding. It is a sequence of federal felonies. My parents were not just overstepping their bounds. They were committing massive financial crimes. I pulled into the bank parking lot at exactly 8:45 in the morning. The branch did not open until 9. I parked my car, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence of the cabin. I took 3 slow, deep breaths. This was the strategy my grandfather had taught me when I was a kid, right before I had to do something incredibly difficult. I decided right then and there what I was not going to do. I was not going to raise my voice. I was not going to use the word mistake. I was not going to let anyone tell me this was a family dispute. At 9 o'clock sharp, the security guard unlocked the glass doors. I stepped out of my car, grabbed my briefcase, and walked inside. The air conditioning hit me cold and sterile. I walked straight past the teller line and approached the reception desk. I told the young woman sitting there my name and stated that I needed to speak with the branch manager immediately regarding a fraudulent lockdown on my trust account. Within 2 minutes, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a carefully neutral expression walked out to greet me. His name tag read Mr. Holbrook. He offered his hand. I shook it firmly. He guided me into his glass-walled office and closed the door behind us. The sound of the lobby was instantly muted. "Please have a seat," Mr. Holbrook said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I pulled up your file the moment the system alerted us to the freeze. I want you to know we take these matters very seriously." I sat down, placed my briefcase on the floor, and folded my hands on my lap. "I am the sole beneficiary of the Arthur Trust," I said, maintaining direct eye contact. "I have not authorized anyone to access that money. I need to see the documents that triggered this freeze." Mr. Holbrook nodded slowly. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the cautious professionalism of a man who knows he is dealing with a highly volatile legal situation. He clicked his mouse a few times, bringing up a secure portal on his computer. He rotated his large monitor so that it faced me directly across the desk. "This was submitted to our central processing office 4 days ago," he said. I leaned forward and looked at the screen. It was a standard, state-specific durable power of attorney form. It granted Patricia and Robert sweeping authority over all my financial assets, including the specific trust fund account number. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, moving quickly down to the bottom of the second page. There it was, my signature. I stared at it for a long moment. It was a decent forgery. It was good enough to fool an automated scanning system or a low-level clerk who was just checking boxes on a Tuesday afternoon. But it was not my signature. When I write the letter D in David, I do not close the top loop. I leave it slightly open, trailing off into the letter A. The signature on the screen had a perfectly closed, rounded D. It was the handwriting of someone who had traced my name from an old birthday card or a return check, but did not understand the muscle memory behind how I actually wrote it. "I did not sign this," I said. My voice was completely flat. Mr. Holbrook let out a slow breath. "I had a feeling you might say that," he replied. "There is more." He scrolled down to the next page in the PDF file. Attached to the power of attorney was a letterhead from a medical clinic I had never heard of, located in a city 200 miles away. The letter stated that I was suffering from severe, acute psychological distress and was currently incapable of managing my own affairs. It recommended immediate familial intervention. It was signed by a doctor named Ainsley Pruitt. "I have never been to this clinic," I said, pointing at the screen. "I have never met a doctor named Ainsley Pruitt. This entire packet is a fabrication." Mr. Holbrook leaned back in his chair. "We tried calling the number on that letterhead yesterday afternoon when the legal department flagged the file for secondary review. It went straight to an automated voicemail that did not state the clinic's name. We left a message. No one called us back." He moved his mouse again. I noticed a slight tension in his jaw. "The legal department also pulled the transmission data," he continued. "This packet was not mailed. It was faxed in. We traced the fax number. It came from a public shipping and printing store in a strip mall about 10 miles from your parents' registered address. They were sloppy. They were incredibly, unbelievably sloppy. They thought because I was their son, they could use amateur tactics and I would just roll over and accept it out of some twisted sense of familial obligation. They forgot what I do for a living." I looked closer at the screen. The PDF viewer Mr. Holbrook was using had a side panel that displayed the document properties. As a forensic accountant, I look at document properties before I even read the text. People think when they scan a piece of paper, they are just creating a picture. They do not realize that modern scanners and word processing software embed hidden information right into the file. It is called metadata. It records the exact time the file was created, the software used, and very often, the registered name of the user who owns the computer or the printer that generated the document. "Mr. Holbrook," I said, leaning closer to the monitor, Can you click on the Advanced Properties tab on the right side of the screen? He looked confused for a second, but he obliged. He clicked the tab. A small gray window popped up over the document. I scanned the lines of data: file size, creation date, modification date. And then there it was: author. Mr. Holbrook went completely silent as he read the name on the screen. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. I stared at the name of the author embedded in the forged document. It was not my mother. It was not my father. It was Kevin, my sister's husband. Seeing Kevin's name hard-coded into the digital DNA of that forged document was the key that unlocked the entire puzzle. It all made perfect sense now. My parents were not tech-savvy enough to orchestrate a digital forgery on their own. They needed an accomplice. And Kevin, my entitled, constantly scheming brother-in-law, was the perfect candidate. I sat back in the leather chair in Mr. Holbrook's office, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. To understand why this was happening, you have to understand the history of that money. You have to understand my grandfather, Arthur. Arthur was a man carved from solid rock. He immigrated from Mexico in his early 20s with absolutely nothing. He spent 40 years building a mid-sized construction supply company from the ground up. He wore steel-toed boots every day of his life, his hands were calloused, and he did not tolerate fools. He was also fiercely observant. He watched his own daughter, my mother Patricia, grow up with an insatiable appetite for things she did not earn. He watched her marry Robert, a man who possessed a silver tongue but lacked any real ambition. When I was 20 years old, I was working 2 part-time jobs just to pay my college tuition. My parents constantly asked me for money. They called it borrowing, but they never paid me back. They told me I needed to contribute to the household, even though I was living in a tiny dorm room and eating instant noodles. One Sunday afternoon, my grandfather called me over to his house. He sat me down at his heavy oak dining table. He placed a thick manila folder in front of me. "David," he had said, his voice raspy from years of breathing in construction dust. "Inside this folder is the paperwork for a trust fund. Contains $2.5 million. It is the proceeds from the sale of my commercial real estate. I am bypassing your mother entirely. This money is in your name." I had sat there, completely stunned, unable to process the number he had just said. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked him. "Because you actually know how to work," he replied bluntly. "And because if I give it to your mother, it will be gone in 5 years. She will buy luxury cars. She will take extravagant trips to pretend she is wealthy. And she will drain every last cent to impress people who do not even like her." He leaned across the table, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "Listen to me very carefully, David. You do not touch this money until you are ready to buy a home or start a business. And you never, ever let your mother put her name on any of your accounts. She will try. She will use guilt. She will use the word familia to make you feel like a bad son. Do not fall for it. Family means supporting each other. It does not mean letting them rob you blind." He died 3 months later. I kept my promise. I let the money sit and grow. I paid off my own student loans. I bought my own small house. I never touched the principle of the trust. And for 16 years, my mother deeply resented me for it. She knew the money existed, but she could not reach it. It drove her insane. Sitting in the bank manager's office, looking at the metadata proving my family was trying to steal my grandfather's legacy, I realized Arthur had seen this exact moment coming a mile away. His prophecy had finally been fulfilled. To say my family had a complicated relationship with money would be a massive understatement. Their financial philosophy was entirely built on a foundation of entitlement and psychological manipulation. I call it the history of borrowing, though borrowing implies an intention to return, which they never had. Started small when I was a teenager. I got my first job at a grocery store when I was 16. I was saving up for a used car. One evening, my father came into my room. He looked slightly embarrassed, but mostly he looked expectant. He told me the mortgage was a little short that month and they needed a temporary loan of $400. He promised to pay it back by Friday. I gave him the cash. Friday came and went. When I finally brought it up 2 weeks later, my mother acted offended. She told me how much it cost to raise me, feed me, and put a roof over my head. She made me feel selfish for asking for my own paycheck back. That was the template. They established a baseline where my money was considered communal family property, but their money was strictly theirs. When I graduated from college and started making a very healthy salary at the accounting firm, the demands escalated. It was no longer $400. It was $2,000 to fix the roof. It was $5,000 to help cover a sudden medical bill for an aunt I barely knew. I paid it time and time again, out of a misplaced sense of duty. I was suffering from cognitive dissonance. I knew they were using me, but I desperately wanted to believe they were just going through a rough patch. I wanted to believe I had loving parents who just struggled with budgeting. But as a forensic accountant, my brain eventually could not ignore the data. I started noticing the discrepancies. They claimed they could not afford the roof repair, but 2 weeks later, my mother bought a brand new designer handbag that cost more than the repair itself. They claimed they were drowning in debt, but my father leased a luxury sedan because he said he needed to maintain a professional appearance for his country club friends. They lived in a constant state of financial delusion. They believed they deserved a wealthy lifestyle, regardless of their actual income. And whenever the math did not add up, they looked to me to balance their books. About 2 years ago, I finally established a hard boundary. I told them I was no longer an open ATM. I stopped giving them cash. I stopped paying for their emergencies. The backlash was immediate and vicious. My mother called me a cold, calculating machine. My father told me I had lost my sense of family values. They orchestrated a campaign of emotional distance, hoping I would cave under the weight of their silent treatment. I did not cave. I focused on my career. I built my life, and I thought that was the end of it. I thought they had finally accepted the boundary. But I was wrong. They had not accepted the boundary. They had simply realized that asking for small handouts was no longer going to work. So they decided to go for the grand prize. They decided to stop asking for my money and just take it all at once. The puzzle piece that was Kevin made everything click into place. If my parents were the architects of this delusion, my sister Michelle and her husband Kevin were the desperate contractors willing to do the dirty work. Michelle is 4 years older than me. In our family dynamic, she was the undisputed golden child. While I was criticized for being too serious and too focused on numbers, Michelle was praised for being outgoing, charming, and conforming perfectly to my mother's image of a successful daughter. The problem was, Michelle's success was entirely cosmetic. She married Kevin right out of college. Kevin was a guy who talked a big game. He worked in middle management at a logistics company and constantly bragged about his upcoming promotions, his stock options, and his brilliant investment strategies. My parents adored him because he mirrored their own obsession with status. Michelle and Kevin bought a 5-bedroom house in a gated community that they clearly could not afford. They drove European SUVs. They took their 3 children on annual vacations to high-end resorts in Cabo San Lucas, posting hundreds of photos online to ensure everyone knew exactly how well they were doing. But I am an auditor. I see the world in ledgers and balance sheets. I knew what Kevin's base salary likely was, and I knew the property taxes in their neighborhood. The math was impossible. They were living on a mountain of credit card debt and massive cash infusions from my parents. My parents were literally draining their own retirement accounts to subsidize Michelle and Kevin's illusion of wealth. This was the core of the rot. My parents had tied their own ego to Michelle's lifestyle. If Michelle and Kevin went bankrupt and lost the big house, it would be a public humiliation for my mother. It would shatter the perfect family image she had curated for her friends. Over the last few months, the cracks had started to show. Kevin had made several snide remarks at family dinners about how the economy was making it tough for investors. Michelle had asked me, completely out of the blue, how much penalty fees cost if you cash out a trust fund early. I had brushed it off at the time, telling her it depended on the trust structure, and changed the subject. Looking at Kevin's name on that metadata screen, I knew exactly what had happened. Kevin's house of cards was collapsing. He was drowning in debt, the promotion he always talked about had probably fallen through, and the bank was likely threatening foreclosure. My parents did not have the cash left to bail him out, so they all sat around a dining room table and looked for a solution. And they looked at me. They looked at the $2.5 million sitting safely under my name, protected by the grandfather who had despised their greed. They convinced themselves that because I was single and had a good job, I did not really need that money. They convinced themselves it was their money anyway. Michelle's greed, Kevin's desperation, and my parents' entitlement had formed a perfect, toxic storm. I looked up from the computer monitor and met Mr. Holbrook's eyes. The bank manager was watching me closely, clearly expecting an outburst. He was expecting me to yell or cry or smash my fist against his mahogany desk. But I felt none of those things. The anger had crystallized into something incredibly dense and cold. "Mr. Holbrook," I said, my voice completely steady, "can you print a hard copy of that entire PDF packet? The power of attorney, the forged medical letter, and most importantly, the page showing the document metadata with Kevin's name." "Absolutely," he said, looking slightly relieved that I was not throwing a tantrum. He hit a few keys on his keyboard, and the laser printer in the corner of his office hummed to life. While the printer was working, I sat back and processed the magnitude of what they had attempted. The forged signature was a financial crime, but the medical letter was something entirely different. The medical letter was an act of profound violence. They were not just trying to steal $2.5 million. By submitting a document claiming I was experiencing acute psychological distress and was incapable of managing my own affairs, they were attempting to strip away my legal autonomy. They were trying to establish a paper trail that painted me as mentally unstable. If I had not caught this, if the bank had processed the paperwork, my parents would have gained full legal custody over my financial life. They could have liquidated my assets, sold my house, and effectively held me hostage under the guise of medical intervention. They were willing to destroy my reputation, my career, and my independence just to pay off Kevin's debts and fund Michelle's vacations. That realization was the exact moment the final thread tying me to my family snapped. Any lingering guilt I had about being a bad son evaporated. Any desire to fix the relationship vanished. The good son was officially dead. The man sitting in the bank manager's office was a forensic investigator who had just uncovered a massive fraud ring, and the perpetrators just happened to share his DNA. The printer stopped humming. Mr. Holbrook gathered the warm pages, stapled them together, and slid the packet across the desk toward me. "David," he said, his tone shifting from professional caution to genuine concern, "I have to ask you how you want to proceed. I have already locked down all your accounts. Your money is completely safe. Nobody can move a dime. But this is a criminal matter. If you want to pursue this, I am legally obligated to contact our fraud department, and they will involve law enforcement. I know these are your parents. I need you to be absolutely sure before we cross that line." I picked up the packet of papers. I looked at the forged signature one last time. I thought about the phone call that morning. I thought about my father saying they were doing it for my own good. I thought about my mother using the word familia as a weapon. "I am absolutely sure," I said, looking Mr. Holbrook dead in the eye. "I want to file a formal fraud report, and I want you to call the police. Right now." I asked Mr. Holbrook to stay in his glass-walled office with me for a few more minutes. Before I involved the authorities and blew this entire situation wide open, I needed to gather every single piece of digital evidence available. In my profession as a forensic accountant, you do not hand a detective a mystery and ask them to solve it for you. You hand them a fully completed puzzle, properly indexed and referenced, and you simply ask them to make the arrest. I looked back at the large computer monitor on the desk and pointed directly to the fax transmission header located at the very top margin of the forged medical document. "Mr. Holbrook," I said, keeping my voice low and methodical, "I need you to pull the exact timestamp and the originating phone number from that fax header. I need the raw data right now." He leaned in, squinting slightly at the small, pixelated numbers printed across the top edge of the PDF file. Came in yesterday afternoon at exactly 2:15, he read aloud, double-checking the screen. The originating area code is 717. I pulled my phone out of my tailored suit pocket and typed the 10-digit number into a basic, publicly available reverse directory search. It took less than 3 seconds for the database result to populate on my screen. The number did not belong to a private medical clinic. It belonged to a commercial shipping and printing store. Specifically, it was a UPS store located in a rundown strip mall exactly 10 miles away from my sister Michelle's suburban house. I looked at the metadata window again. Kevin's name was deeply embedded in the file properties as the original author. That meant the digital PDF was created on a computer registered to him, likely the desktop in his home office. But people who commit financial fraud are rarely smart enough to cover all their digital tracks. They think in straight, outdated lines. They assume that if they physically drive to a different town to send a paper fax, they become a ghost. They forget that every public machine leaves a digital fingerprint, and every transaction creates a permanent record. I carefully explained this entire concept to Mr. Holbrook. They printed the forged documents at Kevin's house, I said, outlining the exact sequence of events for him so he understood the premeditation involved. Then, one of them drove to this specific shipping store to fax it to your central processing center. They were hoping the unfamiliar area code would make the fake medical clinic seem legitimate to whatever clerk processed it. But they made a massive, unforgivable error. What error did they make? Mr. Holbrook asked. He was genuinely invested in the investigation now, leaning forward in his leather chair. They sent it during regular business hours on a Wednesday, I replied. Which means whoever walked into that store to send the fax was caught on multiple high-definition security cameras. And because they had to pay for the fax transmission by the page, there is a 99% chance they did not use cash. People like my parents and my brother-in-law simply do not carry small bills. They use credit cards for absolutely everything to earn travel reward points. There will be a time-stamped credit card transaction matching the exact moment this fax was transmitted to your bank. Mr. Holbrook picked up his pen and wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad. He was looking at me differently now. He was no longer looking at a stressed victim of identity theft. He was looking at a financial predator who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. I thanked him for his time and his help, instructed him to keep the account completely locked down under maximum security, and walked out of the bank lobby. I had the printed evidence packet securely inside my leather briefcase. The bank had the physical forgery on their secure servers. Now, I needed to uncover the exact motive. I needed to know why Kevin and my parents were desperate enough to risk federal prison for $2.5 million today, instead of last month or next year. I drove straight home from the bank branch, locked my heavy oak front door, and walked directly into my home office. This specific room is my absolute sanctuary. It is equipped with a custom-built, high-performance desktop computer, and a massive 4-monitor display array. This is the exact workstation where I systematically dismantle corrupt corporate empires. Today, I was going to use it to completely dismantle my own family. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, woke up the dark screens, and opened my encrypted financial investigation software. I did not need to hack into any secure government mainframes or break any laws. The general public leaves a massive, sprawling trail of financial data completely out in the open if you just know which specific registries to search. I started my investigation with Kevin. Kevin owned a mid-sized logistics consulting firm. He constantly bragged about his massive, prestigious client list and his skyrocketing quarterly revenue at every single family dinner. I logged into the state's corporate registry database and pulled the public filings for his limited liability company. The very first thing I looked for was Uniform Commercial Code filings. A Uniform Commercial Code filing is a legal notice a lender files with the government to declare their legal right to seize assets if a debtor defaults on a business loan. A healthy, functioning company might have 1 or 2 of these on record for standard office equipment leases. Kevin's consulting company had 14 active filings. 14 separate legal liens against his business assets. He had borrowed money against his office furniture, his company vehicles, his computer servers, and even his future accounts receivable. He was effectively running a desperate corporate Ponzi scheme, taking out new, high-interest loans just to pay off the absolute minimum monthly balances of his older loans. I dug even deeper into the data. I accessed public real estate tax records for the wealthy county where he and my sister Michelle lived. Their sprawling 5-bedroom house, the one my mother constantly boasted about to her country club friends, had a massive secondary mortgage taken out on it just 6 months ago. The interest rate on that secondary mortgage was absolutely predatory. It was the exact kind of high-risk loan a person only takes when traditional banks have completely cut off their credit supply. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I built a comprehensive, highly detailed spreadsheet of their complete financial ruin. The numbers populating my screen painted a brutal, undeniable picture of their reality. Kevin's consulting firm was hemorrhaging cash every single day. He had no major corporate clients left on his roster. The luxury European SUVs they drove were heavily leased, and the monthly payments were likely 90 days behind. The grand illusion of their wealth was completely bankrupt. They were drowning in debt, and the cold water was rising incredibly fast. I sat back in my chair and looked at the raw data spanning across my 4 glowing monitors. It was a digital grave, and Kevin had dug it himself with his own arrogance. But Kevin's business failure alone was not enough to push my aging parents into committing a massive federal felony. I needed to connect the final dot in the timeline. I needed to know what the immediate catalyst was. What was the absolute breaking point that made them decide to pull the trigger on forging a power of attorney this exact week? To find the immediate catalyst, I had to shift my focus away from public financial registries and look directly at social media and professional networking sites. People who are deeply obsessed with social status simply cannot resist broadcasting their lives to the public, even when their actual lives are completely falling apart behind closed doors. I opened a new browser window and navigated to Kevin's professional networking profile. For the past 12 months, Kevin had been aggressively and publicly positioning himself for a lucrative partnership buyout at a much larger national logistics firm. He had posted endless, boastful articles about corporate leadership, hinted heavily at massive upcoming career milestones, and basically told his entire network that he was about to become an extremely wealthy executive. My mother had repeated these exact claims constantly, telling everyone in our extended family that Kevin was about to secure their financial legacy forever. I opened another tab and checked the official corporate press announcements for that specific larger logistics firm. Exactly 3 days ago, they had released a public statement welcoming their new managing partners to the board. I scanned the list of names. Kevin's name was absolutely nowhere on that list. The buyout had fallen through. The life-saving promotion was dead. The timeline aligned perfectly with the evidence sitting in my briefcase. 3 days ago, Kevin's ultimate payday vanished into thin air. 2 days ago, the forged medical letter was created on his computer. Yesterday afternoon, the fake power of attorney was faxed to my bank from a local shipping store. I could see the entire pathetic scene playing out in my head as clearly as if I had been standing in the room with them. Kevin got the rejection call from the corporate board. He panicked completely. He drove home and told Michelle they were completely out of money. The predatory secondary mortgage payment was due. The high-interest credit cards were fully maxed out. They called my parents in tears, begging for another massive financial bailout. But my parents had already drained their own retirement savings trying to maintain the family facade over the years. They were completely trapped by their own lies. If Kevin defaulted on his loans, the huge house would be foreclosed on by the bank. My mother's absolute worst nightmare would come true. Her perfect, golden daughter would be exposed to the world as a total fraud. The resulting social humiliation would permanently destroy my mother's fragile, deeply narcissistic ego. So, in an act of pure, selfish desperation, they turned their greedy eyes toward the $2.5 million sitting safely and quietly in my name. They rationalized the theft in their minds. They probably told themselves that because I was single, had no children, and possessed a highly successful career, I was being inherently greedy by keeping the trust money to myself. They used the toxic concept of familia to justify grand larceny. They convinced each other over the dinner table that forging my signature was not an actual crime, but rather a necessary family intervention to save Michelle. They desperately needed my trust fund to pay off Kevin's massive debts and keep their pathetic illusion alive. They were fully willing to sacrifice my financial security, my legal autonomy, and my sanity, all just to protect their social standing. This was not a tragic misunderstanding. It was a highly calculated, predatory execution. There was only one single loose thread left to pull before my case was completely bulletproof. The forged medical letter. The specific name printed on the professional-looking letterhead was Dr. Ainsley Pruitt. I needed to know exactly how they managed to generate that specific, highly detailed document. I opened a secure database connection and ran the name through the State Medical Board's official licensing registry. The search immediately returned 0 results. There was no licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, or medical professional named Ainsley Pruitt practicing anywhere within the state borders. The name was completely fabricated out of thin air, but the medical letterhead itself looked surprisingly authentic. It had a sleek, modern medical logo, a full address located in a distant city, and authentic-looking clinical formatting. Kevin was a failing logistics manager, not a skilled graphic designer. He absolutely could not have created that layout from scratch. I opened a new search tab and typed in the exact phrasing used in the medical letter's header, along with the fake doctor's name. I patiently scanned through several pages of search results until I found a direct link to a massive, popular online freelancing platform. It was a global website where you could hire random people across the world to do cheap digital tasks for a few bucks. Within 10 minutes, I found a specific user profile offering custom medical and legal document templates for novelty purposes. I clicked on the user's portfolio of past work. Right there on the screen, displayed as a sample, was the exact same letterhead design used for Dr. Ainsley Pruitt. The freelancer charged a flat rate of exactly $40 for a custom design delivery. My parents and Kevin had literally paid $40 to a complete stranger on the internet to create a fraudulent document that they fully intended to use to strip away my fundamental legal rights. Before I explain exactly how I built their prison using this evidence, tell me, what is the single most unforgivable financial lie a family member has ever told you? Let me know down in the comments. I needed concrete proof of the financial transaction to tie them directly to the crime. I suddenly remembered that several years ago, my mother had insisted we use a shared family cloud storage account to upload holiday vacation photos. She was famously terrible with basic technology and very often accidentally backed up her entire phone's camera roll to the shared drive without realizing it. I logged into the old cloud account. I had not checked it in over 4 years. I navigated through the folders and clicked on the one clearly labeled Patricia's phone uploads. I scrolled quickly past hundreds of blurry pictures of her backyard garden and her restaurant meals, moving down to the exact dates matching the previous week. And right there, shining on the screen, was a screenshot. My mother had taken a screenshot of an email receipt on her phone, most likely to send a quick text to Kevin as solid proof that she had completed her part of their criminal plan. The bright digital receipt was from the freelancing website. It clearly showed a confirmed payment of $40 for graphic design services. The payment method listed at the bottom was a Visa credit card ending in 4 very specific numbers. I instantly recognized those 4 numbers. They belonged to my mother's primary rewards credit card. I had the metadata proving Kevin created the form. I had the physical location of the UPS store where the fax was sent. I had the digital receipt proving my mother financed the forged medical letter. The forensic investigation was officially complete. I spent the next hour printing every single digital screenshot, every financial spreadsheet, and every public corporate record I had meticulously compiled. I organized the heavy stack of papers into a thick, 40-page binder, carefully separating each individual section with brightly colored plastic tabs. I was not just building a basic legal defense to protect my money. I was building a devastating criminal prosecution. My very first phone call was to my personal attorney, a highly ruthless corporate litigator named Sarah. I explained the entire situation to her in less than 3 minutes, focusing strictly on the facts and the financial exposure. She did not express any warm sympathy or offer useless apologies. She simply expressed sharp tactical approval. "We need to build an absolutely impenetrable legal firewall right now," I told her. "I want a civil restraining order drafted immediately to legally prevent them from contacting me, calling my employer, or approaching my personal property. I also want you to formally notify the bank's central legal department that we are preparing to pursue maximum criminal charges against Patricia, Robert, Michelle, and Kevin." "Consider it done right now," Sarah said. Her voice was sharp, fast, and highly professional. "I will have the civil injunctions filed with a judge by the end of the business day. They will not be able to breathe in your general direction without violating a direct federal court order." My second phone call was to the local city police department. I bypassed the general dispatch operator and specifically asked to speak to a senior detective in the Financial Crimes Division. After a brief hold, I was directly connected to an officer named Reyes. "Officer Reyes," I said, maintaining a perfectly calm, highly authoritative tone. "My name is David. I am a professional forensic accountant. I have just uncovered an active, highly documented conspiracy to commit federal bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the submission of falsified medical records against a federally insured financial institution. The perpetrators are my immediate family members. The target was a protected trust fund valued at exactly $2.5 million. I have complete documentary evidence ready to hand over, including digital file metadata, credit card transaction receipts, and the physical forged documents themselves." There was a very long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then Officer Reyes finally spoke. "Where are you right now, sir?" she asked, her tone shifting to serious professional interest. "I am currently at my home office," I replied smoothly. "But the attempted crime occurred at my local bank branch earlier this morning. I would like to arrange a formal meeting to hand over the complete evidence binder to you. And, if you are willing, I would like to coordinate a controlled encounter at the bank to secure their full confessions on the record." Officer Reyes did not hesitate. She agreed to meet me at the bank branch in exactly 1 hour. I hung up the phone and looked at the thick white binder sitting on my desk. It represented the complete, irreversible destruction of my family. It meant my mother would likely go to a federal prison. It meant my sister's children would stand on a lawn and see their parents led away in cold steel handcuffs. A lesser man might have hesitated in that moment. A lesser man might have felt a sudden pang of deep guilt and considered calling them to give them one last, desperate chance to apologize and back away. But I had spent my entire adult life apologizing for their toxic behavior. I had spent 36 years being the quiet, good son, the reliable bank account, the ultimate backup plan for their failures. I picked up the heavy binder, placed it carefully into my leather briefcase, snapped the brass locks shut, and walked out to my car. The emotional part of my brain was entirely shut off. It was time for the execution. I arrived back at the bank branch exactly 60 minutes later. Officer Reyes was already waiting for me quietly in the main lobby. She was a sharp, highly observant woman in her late 30s. She did not wear a standard blue police uniform, but rather a dark, tailored suit that closely mirrored my own professional attire. We exchanged a brief nod, walked straight into Mr. Holbrook's glass-walled office, and firmly closed the heavy door behind us. I opened my briefcase and placed the thick, 40-page binder squarely on the mahogany desk. For the next 20 minutes, I walked Officer Reyes through every single colored tab. I showed her the digital metadata with Kevin's name clearly embedded in it. I showed her the complete financial ruin of his logistics company. I showed her the $40 receipt on my mother's credit card for the fake psychiatrist letterhead. Officer Reyes took diligent, meticulous notes in a small black notebook. When I finally finished the presentation, she looked up at me with a profound sense of respect. "You built a better, more comprehensive case in 3 hours than most of my detectives build in 3 full weeks," she said. "This entire package is completely airtight. The forgery alone is a major felony. The falsified medical records elevate the charges to aggravated fraud." "I know it is," I said flatly, keeping my hands folded on the desk. but we need to legally lock them in. If we just send squad cars to arrest them at their suburban houses right now, they will have plenty of time to coordinate their lies. They will immediately claim Kevin acted alone, or they will claim I gave them verbal permission over the phone and simply forgot. We need them to commit to the lie on the official record inside the bank. How exactly do you propose we do that? Mr. Holbrook asked, leaning forward. We use the bait, I replied smoothly. I want you to call my mother right now, Mr. Holbrook. Tell her the legal power of attorney has been fully reviewed, but the system requires an in-person verification signature from the designated agents to finalize the actual transfer of the $2.5 million. Tell her it is just a standard bank security protocol. Mr. Holbrook looked directly at Officer Reyes for confirmation. Officer Reyes nodded her official approval. It is a controlled sting operation, she said. If they show up and attempt to execute the forged document in person while claiming it is real, the criminal intent to defraud is absolutely undeniable. Mr. Holbrook picked up his desk phone, dialed my mother's cell phone number, and put the call on speaker so we could all hear. She answered immediately, her voice dripping with fake, sickening sweetness. Hello? She answered. Patricia, this is Mr. Holbrook, the branch manager at your son's bank. I am calling regarding the legal power of attorney you submitted to us. Oh yes, Mr. Holbrook, my mother said, her tone instantly shifting to sound incredibly weary and concerned. Thank you so much for calling back. We are just so incredibly worried about David. Is everything finally processed? Can we get him the medical help he desperately needs? Everything is in order on our end. Mr. Holbrook lied with incredible smoothness. However, due to the massive size of the trust fund, federal banking regulations require the designated agents, which would be you and your husband, to come down to the branch and sign a final verification form in person. It should only take a few short minutes. There was a slight, calculating pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the greed running through her head. Of course, she finally said, Familia first. We can be there in 20 minutes. Mr. Holbrook hung up the phone. The trap was perfectly set. Now all we had to do was wait for them to walk right into it. I stayed completely hidden inside Mr. Holbrook's glass-walled office, carefully positioning my leather chair so I was partially obscured by a tall metal filing cabinet, but still had a perfectly clear view of the main lobby. Officer Reyes stood silently near the back hallway, completely out of sight but ready to move at a moment's notice. Exactly 22 minutes later, the heavy glass front doors of the bank slid open. My mother and father walked in together. I watched their body language very carefully. My mother, Patricia, was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and her most expensive pearl earrings. She carried her designer leather handbag in front of her like a shield. Her facial expression was a perfectly rehearsed mask of solemn, heavy duty. She looked exactly like a wealthy, deeply concerned matriarch who was carrying a terrible burden for the sake of her family's well-being. My father, Robert, walked exactly half a step behind her. He wore a crisp, expensive golf shirt and tailored khakis. He had his hands casually tucked into his pockets, exuding a strong aura of calm, reasonable authority. They did not look nervous in the slightest. They did not look like two people who had just committed a massive string of federal financial felonies. They looked utterly, sickeningly arrogant. They looked like they genuinely believed they had already won the grand prize. They walked purposefully past the waiting area and approached the main reception desk. My mother leaned forward, speaking in a soft, hushed, highly dramatic tone to the young woman behind the counter. "We are here to see Mr. Holbrook," she said quietly. "He called us just a few minutes ago regarding our son, David. It is a very delicate family medical matter." The receptionist, who had been thoroughly briefed by Mr. Holbrook beforehand, nodded politely and asked them to wait a moment while she paged him. Watching them perform this elaborate charade made the cold, hard anger in my chest solidify into absolute ice. They were so incredibly practiced at this specific routine. They had spent decades weaponizing their public image, using the grand illusion of respectability to manipulate and control everyone around them. They truly, deeply believed that because they looked the part of upstanding citizens, the actual laws did not apply to them. They believed their own toxic lies. Mr. Holbrook stepped out of his office and greeted them warmly in the middle of the lobby. "Patricia, Robert," he said, shaking their hands professionally. "Thank you both for coming in so quickly on such short notice." "Of course," my father said, using his deep, resonant, reassuring voice. "Whatever David needs. It absolutely breaks our hearts to see him struggling like this. But as his parents, we have to make the hard choices. We have to step in and protect his financial assets until he eventually recovers." It was physically nauseating to listen to. He was standing in the middle of a federally insured bank, actively trying to steal $2.5 million, and framing the entire theft as an act of noble paternal sacrifice. Mr. Holbrook nodded slowly, maintaining his flawless professional composure. "Before we sign the final legal release forms," he said, "I just need to ask a few standard compliance questions for our records. Regarding the power of attorney document you submitted, can you confirm right now that David signed this document in your physical presence?" "Absolutely, my mother lied without missing a single solitary beat. He signed it at our kitchen table last Sunday evening. He was very distressed, but he knew it was the right thing to do for his future." "And the medical letter from Dr. Pruitt?" Mr. Holbrook pressed gently, his voice even. "A close family friend recommended her to us," my father added smoothly, backing up the lie. "David had a private telehealth consultation with her. She completely confirmed he is suffering from acute exhaustion and needs immediate intervention." They had fully committed to the lie. They had stated, out loud and permanently on the record, that the forged documents were completely authentic. The final, heavy piece of the trap had just snapped shut. At Mr. Holbrook's subtle hand signal, Officer Reyes walked out from the shadowed back hallway. She approached my parents with slow, highly measured steps. She reached into her jacket pocket and flashed her police badge, holding it up high so the gold shield caught the bright overhead fluorescent lights of the bank lobby. "Excuse me," she said, her voice easily cutting through the quiet hum of the bank. "Are you Patricia and Robert?" My mother's face dropped instantly. The perfectly rehearsed mask of the concerned, wealthy parent slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing genuine, raw panic underneath. But my mother was a master manipulator who had spent her entire life dodging accountability. In less than a heartbeat, she recovered her composure and immediately deployed her ultimate psychological defense mechanism. She used DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. "Yes, I am Patricia," my mother said, stepping forward and dramatically clutching her chest as if she were having heart palpitations. "Oh my God. Is this about David? Is he okay? Has he hurt himself? We have been so absolutely terrified for him. He has become so completely unstable lately." Officer Reyes did not flinch or offer any comfort. "Ma'am, I am a senior detective with the Financial Crimes Unit of the City Police Department. I am here right now to ask you direct questions about the legal power of attorney and the medical documents submitted to this bank today to access a $2.5 million trust fund." My mother immediately burst into loud, theatrical tears. It was an incredible, Oscar-worthy performance. Real, heavy water welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "Officer, you simply do not understand the situation." She sobbed loudly, leaning heavily against my father's arm for physical support. "My poor son is very, very sick. He is deeply paranoid. He thinks everyone in the world is out to get him. We are just trying to save his life before he ruins it. We are his family. He probably called the police on us because he is having a severe manic episode right now. You absolutely cannot listen to him." My father jumped in immediately, seamlessly playing the role of the strong, protective husband defending his distraught wife. "Detective, this is a highly private family medical issue," my father said firmly. "We have the proper legal paperwork right here in our hands. Our son needs immediate psychiatric help, not police harassment. We are acting entirely legally under a standard power of attorney." They were desperately trying to flip the entire narrative upside down. They were trying to make the trained police officer actually believe that I was the crazy one, that I was a physical danger to myself, and that their blatant, documented forgery was actually a heroic, loving rescue mission. They were viciously attacking my credibility in a desperate attempt to hide their own massive crimes. Officer Reyes held up her hand, stopping my father mid-sentence. "Sir," she said coldly, her tone entirely devoid of sympathy, "we have already verified with the State Medical Board that Dr. Ainsley Pruitt does not actually exist. We have legally traced the fax transmission of the power of attorney to a public UPS store exactly 10 miles from your daughter's house. And we have the digital metadata proving the document was forged on a computer owned by your son-in-law, Kevin." The silence that followed that statement was absolute and deafening. My mother stopped crying instantly. The tears simply vanished from her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. My father's jaw tightened visibly. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. They realized, in that exact, horrifying moment, that their amateur hour lies had collided head-on with professional law enforcement, and they had lost. But my mother simply could not accept defeat. Her towering narcissism would not allow her brain to process the reality of the situation. She tried one last, incredibly desperate pivot. "There must be some terrible mistake," she stammered, her voice shaking violently now. "Kevin must have misunderstood what we asked him to do. We did not know the doctor was completely fake. We just wanted to help David. David would never, ever press criminal charges against his own parents. We are his mother and father. We are his familia." That was my exact cue. I stepped out of Mr. Holbrook's office. I walked slowly and deliberately across the bank lobby, the hard leather soles of my Oxford shoes clicking loudly and rhythmically against the polished tile floor. My parents turned their heads to look at me. Their eyes widened in pure horror. They looked at my perfectly tailored charcoal suit, my rigid, uncompromising posture, and the heavy leather binder clutched tightly in my right hand. I did not look like the soft, compliant son they could easily bully into handing over a paycheck. I looked exactly like the man who ruthlessly audited multinational corporations for a living. I looked exactly like their absolute worst nightmare come to life. "David," my mother gasped out. Her voice was weak, high-pitched, and pleading. "David, please tell them. Tell them this is all just a big misunderstanding." I stopped exactly 10 feet away from them. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the precise, mechanical articulation of a federal prosecutor reading a final death sentence. "There is absolutely no misunderstanding here, Patricia," I said. I used her first name intentionally. I permanently refused to call her mom ever again. "You paid exactly $40 on a freelancer website to buy a fake medical letterhead using your personal Visa card ending in 7241. Kevin actively forged my signature because his logistics company is facing 14 active corporate liens and his predatory secondary mortgage is currently in default. You attempted to steal $2.5 million today to fund Michelle's completely fake lifestyle." My father stepped forward aggressively, his fists clenched tight at his sides. "Son, you listen to me right now," he demanded. "You are tearing this entire family apart over money." I cut him off instantly. "You tore this family apart the exact moment you decided my independence was less important than your massive ego. Robert, I am not tearing anything apart today. I am simply auditing the wreckage you created." I turned my head to look at Officer Reyes. "Detective, you have the complete binder. You have the verbal confession they just gave Mr. Holbrook on the official record. I am formally pressing criminal charges against both of them to the absolute maximum extent of the law." My mother started hyperventilating, her chest heaving. "You cannot do this to us," she shrieked, all pretense of wealthy dignity completely gone. "We raised you from a child. We put a roof over your head. You owe us your life." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh, freezing whisper. "Grandfather Arthur saw exactly who you really were 16 years ago. He warned me about this exact day. Today, you simply proved him right." Officer Reyes unclipped the radio from her belt. "Dispatch, we need 2 transport units at the Central Bank branch immediately," she said clearly. She turned back to my parents and pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her tactical belt. Patricia and Robert, place your hands securely behind your backs. You are both officially under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the forgery of legal documents. My father did not try to fight. He went completely limp, the crushing reality of federal prison turning his arrogant posture into dust. But my mother fought. She screamed loudly. She cried hysterically. She invoked the word familia over and over again as Officer Reyes forced her arms back and clicked the cold metal cuffs tightly around her wrists. I stood perfectly still and watched. I did not blink once. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or regret. I watched them get escorted out of the glass doors of the bank and pushed roughly into the back of two separate police cruisers. The red and blue emergency lights flashed violently against the bank windows, illuminating the lobby in sharp bursts. The execution was fully complete. The good son was gone forever, and my grandfather's trust fund was entirely safe. The immediate fallout from the arrests at the bank was swift and absolutely devastating for my family. The legal system, which they had arrogantly tried to use as a weapon against me, crushed them with incredible efficiency. Later that exact same afternoon, a different squad of police officers arrived at my sister's large suburban house. Kevin was arrested in his own driveway, right in front of his wealthy neighbors, as he was stepping out of his leased European SUV. The subsequent criminal trial took less than 11 months to conclude. Because I had handed the prosecution a fully complete, perfectly documented forensic binder, my parents' defense attorneys had absolutely nothing to work with. There was no plea deal offered. During the trial, the complete and total ruin of Kevin's logistics company and the massive secondary mortgages on their house were laid bare in the public courtroom records. The grand illusion of their immense wealth was completely shattered for everyone in their social circle to see. When the judge finally handed down the sentences, he was not gentle. He specifically cited their predatory exploitation of familial trust and their horrific attempt to falsify psychiatric records to strip away my legal autonomy. Patricia, my mother, was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. Robert, my father, was sentenced to 5 years. Kevin received the harshest sentence of 7 years. As the digital investigation revealed, he had also used the exact same computer and printer to forge lease modifications for his failing business 2 years prior. I attended the final sentencing hearing. I sat in the very back row of the courtroom, wearing the exact same charcoal suit I wore to the bank. When the bailiff led my mother away, she stopped and turned to look at me one last time. She expected to see regret in my eyes. I gave her absolutely nothing. I held her gaze with cold, blank indifference until she finally looked away and walked through the heavy wooden doors. The toxic empire they had built entirely on lies and stolen money was officially reduced to rubble. In the weeks following the trial, the remaining pieces of the family desperately tried to reach out to me. Michelle, whose life had completely collapsed overnight, called my phone incessantly. Her house was actively being foreclosed on by the bank, and her luxury cars had already been repossessed. She left frantic, crying voicemails begging for my forgiveness. She pleaded for a massive financial loan from the trust fund so she could afford a small apartment for her children, trying to use my nieces and nephews as emotional leverage against me. I did not answer a single one of her calls. I did not text her back. Instead, I called my attorney, Sarah, one more time. I instructed her to draft and aggressively enforce a permanent, legally binding restraining order against Michelle. I had zero obligation to save my sister from a disaster she had actively helped orchestrate. I sent the legal documents via certified mail, officially and permanently severing the very last toxic blood tie I had to that family. I completely changed my phone number. I upgraded the security system on my house. I moved the entire $2.5 million trust fund to a completely different financial institution, one that utilized advanced biometric security and required a strict 3-factor verification process for any authorization changes whatsoever. I established absolute, unbreakable boundaries. I realized that my entire life, I had been taught that enduring abuse was just the normal price of having a family. But the truth is, real family does not require your total silence, and real family certainly does not forge your signature in a strip mall to steal your grandfather's money. I was finally free from the heavy, suffocating weight of their constant expectations and their endless financial demands. I am 37 years old now. I still live quietly in the same small brick house I bought myself years ago. I still wake up incredibly early every morning, brew a strong cup of black coffee, and enjoy the absolute silence before the sun comes up. I still work as a forensic accountant, dismantling corporate fraud, but I do it with a much deeper understanding of how greed can poison even the closest relationships. On Sunday mornings, I often sit out on my back porch and think about my grandfather, Arthur. I think about the heavy oak table where he handed me that manila folder all those years ago. He was a hard man, but he was a profoundly wise man. He saw the rot in my mother's character long before it fully consumed her. He gave me the trust fund not just as a financial gift, but as a critical test of my own strength. He wanted to make sure I had the spine to protect myself when the time finally came. I keep exactly one single photograph of my parents in a small box in my closet. It is an old picture from when I was 4 years old, taken on a beach. They are smiling and I am smiling back at them. I keep it not because I miss them, but because it serves as a permanent, quiet reminder. It reminds me that sometimes, the people who smile at you the brightest are the exact same people who will not hesitate to destroy you if it serves their own selfish interests. The trust fund is entirely safe. My career is thriving. My life is completely my own. And if anyone ever tries to approach me again with a soft voice, telling me they need to step in and take control for my own good, I will not hesitate or argue. I will simply open my laptop, pull the digital records, and ruthlessly build their prison all over again.